stream is what we're waiting for. All right, we're waiting. The little thing is just spinning around and around and around. And I'm just, there it goes. All right. YouTube is ready to go. All right. Let me do a search for Theology Central. Do that right here. 516 subscribers. Around and around. Always love that. Okay, ladies and gentlemen. And hang on, let me do a refresh here. There we are. How many webcasts are currently underway? We have 3 webcasts currently underway. Looks like a Baptist church in Germany. We have a Madison Baptist Church that's been going on for an hour and 38 minutes. So I'm assuming they're about done. And then we have NRC of Lethbridge. And they've been broadcasting for 39 minutes. Okay, so you've got those all broadcasting. Choose any of those if they will make you more happy or happier. But for now, I'm going to check us out. Bridge. How do we sound here? And they've been broadcasting for 39. Okay, so I think we're good to go there. Come back here, do a refresh. All right. According to the map, oh wait, that's a good sign. Never mind. I can't trust the map. The map shows nobody is listening to me. I can't trust it because I clicked on the link on YouTube and I clicked on the link at sermonaudio.com. So it should show 2 people are listening from Texas. Okay, there it goes. All right, there's the 2 from Texas. All right, so the map is working. It's just moving very, very, very slow. All right, but are you ready? Well, the map is behind. I'll check it at the end to see if anybody tuned in. If you do tune in, thank you so very much. I greatly appreciate it. I think I've got everything ready to go here. I've got all my notes. All right. I hope you're ready. I hope you're ready. Are you ready? Here we go. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, cats, dogs, and any other animal, you're all welcome to join in. People from other planets, whatever, whomever, wherever, however, welcome. Thank you. We begin in 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1.
Looking at our world from a theological perspective, this is the Theology Central podcast, making theology central.
Good evening, everyone. It is Thursday, January the 22nd, 2026. It is currently 8:31 p.m. Central Time, and I'm coming to you live from the Theology Central studio, located right here in Abilene, Texas. And as I sit here in the studio, everyone in West Texas, everyone all over Texas, we are waiting. No, they're not waiting for this broadcast, but we are waiting for the great winter storm of 2026 to hit. What's it going to be? How bad is it going to be? Is the power grid going to hold or is it going to collapse? Are we going to lose power? Are we going to lose everything? I don't know. What's going to occur? Everyone is waiting. I've been keeping up with this developing story about the coming winter storm. And originally, there were predictions of us getting somewhere between like 8 to 12 inches of snow. Like it was going to be catastrophic, apocalyptic. It was going to be the end of the world. I told you I was skeptical of that. I've been following the weather maps. I've been following all the weather models. I think the storm is going to stay more to our north, and I think that we're going to get probably maybe 2 inches of rain tomorrow. We do need the rain, so that will be good. And then it's looking like maybe somewhere around midnight, going to Friday into Saturday morning, it will change over to ice. Now, I saw some predictions today that now they have us for snow somewhere between 1 and 3 inches. That makes a little bit more sense. Now, I know 1 to 3 inches is nothing to many of you based on where you live, but for here in West Texas, that can still cause a considerable amount of panic and problems. All right. So 1 to 3, and then just some ice. So I don't know. I'm still very skeptical of the whole thing, but here's what I know. This is what I've seen in all of the years living in Texas, growing up here in Texas, is when it comes to winter storms, that they struggle a lot trying to figure out what's going to happen, because it doesn't take a lot for it to mess everything up here, right? Because typically things are too warm for that kind of thing. So trying to make the prediction if the cold air is going to make it all the way here, or is it going to kind of stall out before it gets this far down? We may have the moisture in place, but we may not get the temperatures to make it all work. I'm not going to get into a whole discussion about weather, but so many times they tell us it's the end, be prepared, that, this is going to be the biggest winter storm in history, and, nothing happens. And then other times they're like, oh no, we're good, don't worry about it. And all of a sudden, you open the door and you're like, what just happened? So I don't know. I'm still waiting. I've been talking about it and the beginning of all of my episodes, because it's kind of the big story here, right? They're already closing down things and announcing closures and delays already all across the city. Everyone loses their mind here. I know for many of you in other places, you're like, it snows every day. What's the big deal? It's always freezing. Okay, I understand. But for West Texas, hey, this is not our normal. So, yeah. So people are having lots of thoughts and opinions and concerns, and you're going to know what happens, because as long as I've got power at the internet and this microphone, I'll probably record something and tell you about what's going on. But we're not here to talk about that story. We're not here to talk about the weather story. We're not here to talk about the story of the great weather apocalypse or the winter apocalypse of 2026. No. We're here to talk about a different kind of story. And there are certain Bible stories that are so familiar, so embedded into our kind of Christian imagination, that we almost never stop and ask whether the story actually makes any sense. It becomes a part of, hey, you hear this story over and over and over within Christianity, these Bible stories, right? And you learn the Bible stories, especially as a kid going to Sunday school. The Sunday school teachers love to tell the Bible stories, right? Make them sound fascinating, exciting. And they're like, oh, I captured the kids' imaginations. And I understand that in many cases that works. I think sometimes the kids walk away with a kind of a misunderstanding of what the story is actually about. And we could have we could do an entire podcast series about that. But I think even whether it's in the Sunday school classroom for the young people, or whether it's in the main sanctuary for the adults, what happens is these stories get told. Everyone just accepts the stories, right? No one challenges them. No one is questioning them. They just accept the story. And I think sometimes it's almost as if no one is allowed to go, huh? Wait, what? No, nobody else has a problem here, right? It's like you just accept the story. And I think the story, well, we've been talking about weather, the story about a huge rain, a huge storm, a huge flooding event. We call it the flood of Genesis chapter 6 through 9, the global worldwide flood that wiped everything out, right? You talk about a rain shower, you talk about a rainstorm. This was of catastrophic proportions. It wipes everything out. And we know the story of the flood. It's one of those stories that everyone hears and everyone just accepts. And we all know the basic version, right? The world, and I'm kind of summarizing, but we know the basic version here, right? The world was so evil, so corrupt, so messed up that God destroyed it and started over with Noah. We most of the time, even in sermons, we can kind of make it pretty simple and pretty basic. We make the story sound somewhat clean. It sounds very morally straightforward, right? It sounds like, okay, nobody should have a problem with this story. It's pretty straightforward. But the more, I think if you carefully read the Bible itself, I think the more uncomfortable questions, well, they start to surface. I think a lot of uncomfortable questions start to surface, especially with the story of the flood. I'm just going to say it. The story of the flood makes zero sense to me. I don't get it. I've always had a problem with it. And well, my problem with it is leading us to where we are right now. And I'm going to talk about exactly how we have ended up at this moment. So what I want to do tonight is I don't want to start by offering a new theory. I don't want to do that. I want to start by doing something I think much more basic. And maybe many will say much more dangerous. I want to start by asking whether the standard explanation of the flood story in Genesis 6 through 9, if it even works. Does the standard explanation even work? Does the standard explanation even make any sense? And I want to do this by pointing out two foundational problems with the story. But before I do that, let me just remind you how we got here. I told everyone to get a copy of the book, Introduction to Systematic Theology by Paul Zeron. You can get your own copy by going to smallchurchsos.com. Scrolling up, look for the PDF file. You can get it for free, 444 pages. You have your own systematic theology there to use. They have a link that you can purchase a hard copy. I have it right here. And we're in this section of the systematic theology that's basically trying to prove that the Bible is the infallible, inerrant Word of God. And one of the pieces of evidence the systematic theology tries to put forth is that the Bible is unified in its message. So it goes through all of these examples, starting in like Genesis 3, saying, see, in every one of these passages, we find Jesus. In every one of these passages, we find Jesus. And we looked at Genesis 3, Genesis 4, and we've looked at Genesis 6. And we have seen that the claims that we find Jesus in many cases are majorly problematic. And the reason they find Jesus there is because they're inserting him into the text, not because he's naturally in the text. And one of the things they do with the flood is they say that the flood represents the final judgment. Jesus represents the ark. And we saw all the problems with that. And we ended up in 1 Peter chapter 3, right? That is the New Testament, the one passage in the New Testament that really kind of expounds and tells us about the flood. And what we did is we found out, Peter doesn't say Jesus is the ark or the ark is Jesus. It doesn't even use that. It does something more confounding and confusing. Basically, water basically equals baptism, which kind of basically equals salvation. And we're kind of like, wait, how does that all work? And so we spent a lot of time working on all of that. I'm not going to go back and review it. But there was something else in 1 Peter chapter 3 that mentions something happening in relation to the flood, right before the flood, that is confounding and confusing. And so I thought, we just need to talk about, the fact that the flood makes no sense. And we need to see if we can make it make sense. I know you're going to think it makes sense. I know everyone has the flood. That's just if the story is just so confusing. So I want to try to demonstrate the problem by looking at I want to try to show you the bigger problem by looking at two foundational problems. And I'm going to try to look at two foundational problems that I think most Christians never stop to face. These are not emotional problems like, whoa, God killed everyone. No, we're not going to look at it from that perspective. These are not philosophical problems. Well, how can a loving God wipe out everyone? We're not looking at it from an emotional perspective or a philosophical perspective. I think these are just textual problems that arise from the text itself. The first problem comes from simply continuing to read the book of Genesis after the flood. If you just read Genesis 6 through 9, Think of it this way. Okay, Genesis 6. All right. Oh, God's going to destroy everything. Okay, the ark gets built. The waters come crashing down. The heavens open. Flood, death, destruction. Okay, they float around. Finally, the ark finds a place to sit down, to settle down. Then the door opens and they walk out. From the minute that door opens, if you just continue to read your Bible, from the minute the door of the ark opens and you just keep reading, if you at some point don't stop and go, wait a minute, this makes no sense. But for some weird reason, nobody ever stops and goes, this makes no sense. But every good Bible student should be like, this makes no sense. Now, I know being a good Bible student will almost constantly put you at odds with the church. The church doesn't want good Bible students. The church just wants you to be committed to their theological system. But I'm sorry, I've got problems. And the first problem is just read what happens after the flood. So that's problem number one. It's a textual problem. And how do you discover this problem? You just open your Bible after the door opens on the ark, and you just keep reading. And you just notice everything that's occurring, and you should stop and go, something doesn't make any sense. The second problem comes from the New Testament. So what we're going to do tonight is we're not going to solve everything. I'm not going to be able to solve everything, but I am going to try to put my finger on something that almost no one wants to talk about. The flood story, as it is usually explained, does not actually explain the flood. The flood story, as it is usually explained, does not actually explain the flood. Nobody really explains the flood, and all the supposed explanations people give for the flood make no sense. So are you ready for those two foundational problems? Problem number one is what happens when you just continue to read after the flood. And the second problem is when you go to the New Testament and you're like, wait, the New Testament says what about the flood? This is confounding and confusing. So are you ready? Problem number one. I'm going to set my systematic theology down. Going to put that right there. I got my Bible open. Are you ready? Problem number one. What happens after the flood? Or we can say the post-flood world is a massive problem to the standard explanations of the flood. Why? Because the post-world, after the flood, the post-flood world is deeply corrupted. Now, remember the story is typically explained. God got rid of everything because it was corrupted and there was so much sin. Well, that makes no sense if the post-flood world ends up just as corrupted as the world was before the flood. Something does not make any sense, all right? So if the flood was meant to fix human corruption, Genesis itself, the book of Genesis itself, goes out of its way to show you without there's no way to even debate it. The rest of Genesis is like, hey, that flood didn't fix the problem. Hey, the flood didn't fix the problem. Hey, the flood didn't fix the problem. Hey, the flood didn't fix the problem. Immediately after the flood, Genesis 9 through 11, Noah gets drunk and he takes off all his clothes. That happens almost instantaneously. He's like, woohoo, dry land. And he gets drunk and takes off all of his clothes. That happens almost instantaneously. Ham sins against his father in some way, shape, or form. We could have a long discussion about what happens inside that tent. There's a family curse, division follows, and then you have human pride and rebellion against God at the Tower of Babel in Genesis chapter 11. So just immediately after the flood, from Genesis 9 through 11, we see sin, we see division. Well, immediately you're like, well, wait a minute. So why did God have to kill everyone if the same problem here? And I cannot stress this enough. God killed everyone who did not get on the ark because they were sinners, and that sin was corrupting the world. But he put 8 people inside the ark. who were sinners, who carried the same sin, the same corruption, and carried it right out of the ark into the world, re-corrupting the world and repopulating a sinful world that everyone is born a sinner. And we see that sin start immediately, Genesis chapter 9, all the way through Genesis chapter 11. And then when you get to the patriarchal world, right? Abraham, he lies about Sarah twice. Oh, and then what did they do? He lies about Sarah twice. And then, well, it's very difficult to read about him taking Hagar and thinking, well, that was a nice, beautiful, consensual story. Did she have any agency? Did she have any, she's a slave. Hey, I'm going to give you my slave. Go have a child with her. Well, you've got adultery. You've got, it's hard not to see it as possible rape. It's hard not to just see it as rape. You got some messed up stuff going on, right? You end up with polygamy. You end up with all kinds of problems just right there, all right? Isaac lies about Rebekah, Genesis chapter 26. Jacob deceives his father and steals Esau's blessing, Genesis 27. He himself is deceived by Laban, Genesis chapter 29. He manipulates others for wealth and advantage, Genesis chapter 30. You got all kinds of problems going on with good old Jacob, all right? And then you have widespread violence. You have Shechem rapes Dinah in Genesis 34. You have rape. You have, Simeon and Levi massacre an entire city in revenge in Genesis chapter 34. You have sexual immorality with Tamar. Judah commits sexual immorality with Tamar in Genesis chapter 38. Joseph and his brothers, there's hatred and conspiracy to murder. There's human trafficking and sell his brother into slavery. And there's years of deception towards their father. All of that happens in Genesis 37. So, you've got rape, sexual immorality, deceit. You've got everything going on. And don't even get me started in everything that happens with Sodom and Gomorrah. Come on. Sodom and Gomorrah is characterized by extreme wickedness. And then what happens? Angelic visitors come into the city. Is there any nice way to describe what happens? They surround the house. They threaten to basically bring us these people so that we can know them. Sexual violence against, angelic visitors. They threaten sexual violence. All of the men of the city. You're talking, that's hard to even wrap your mind around what happened is going to, and what would have happened if they would have gotten the individuals, what would have occurred. Come on. There's no, I know we don't want to talk about it in church. That's a horrible type of rape that would have occurred. There's no way to get around that. And then remember the great solution. Hey, guys. No. Don't do anything to these, my visitors, but you can have my daughters and do anything you want. A man offers up his daughters for the men of the city to forcibly use them sexually. That is beyond despicable and disgusting. Now, this is all the wonderful world that happens after the flood, right? You've got divine judgment that destroys the cities. And then what happens after all of the destruction, after everything? His daughter's getting drunk. They commit incest with their own father. And they do it on 2 successive nights, producing Moab and Ammon. 2 nights in a row, they commit incest. Oh, this is the wonderful world after the flood. The flood did not produce a morally renewed humanity. It did not even produce a morally renewed family. And honestly, I think that's why we've got to consider this and understand this. The Bible itself refuses to sanitize the post-flood world. It piles on example after example after example until the reader is forced to admit, hey, whatever the flood was about, it wasn't about fixing the human heart. It wasn't about getting rid of sin. It wasn't about fixing this problem. Whatever the flood was about, see, if you keep reading after Genesis 9, at some point you should stop in your Bible reading going, wait, what was the point of that whole flood thing? But no, Christians want to run around and have some argument about, wait, where did the ark land? Can we find the ark? Were there dinosaurs on the ark? Christians sometimes always talk about the most ridiculous stuff instead of the important stuff. The important stuff is I don't care where the ark is. I don't care if there were dinosaurs on it, no dinosaurs on it. I don't care if the animals slept, if they were awake. I don't care how big the ark was. I don't care about any of that because the story itself makes no sense. Kill everyone because they're all bad so that we can just have more bad after the flood. I'm just like, that's baffling. That is confounding and confusing. So not long after the flood, not in some distant future, but immediately, the post-flood world is just an absolute mess. All right? You're going to end up with slavery, oppression, and injustice in Egypt. You're going to get lying, manipulation, favoritism, cruelty everywhere. The point is unavoidable. And we don't even have to leave the book of Genesis to prove all of this, right? The world is not morally healed. It's not a spiritual reset for humanity. It's the same world with the same corruption. So if the flood was God's solution to human sin, it solved absolutely nothing. It was meaningless. It was just, I'm going to kill everyone because you're all so bad. But yet the same badness is in the very ark. So it literally makes no sense. It's confounding and confusing. And all good Bible students should be able to go, yeah, you're kind of right. It doesn't matter what your theological system says. Everyone should be able to go, it just logically makes no sense. That's problem number one. The flood just makes no sense. And all you have to do is read from Genesis 9 to Genesis 50. And if you can't see that it doesn't make any sense, I don't know what to do. You've been brainwashed by Sunday school. All right. You've been brainwashed by the church. You don't need to listen to the church. Listen to the text. But this leads us to the second foundational problem. The New Testament seems to indicate that something else was going on, that there was some other problem, and it wasn't about humans and it wasn't about sin. Right? So, and I just want you to think about this. Even if someone tries to say, okay, fine, the flood didn't fix human sin, but it was still about judging sinful people. Even if you try to say that, to me, there's a bigger problem. The New Testament does not allow us to say that, I don't think. I don't think you can say, well, hey, even if it didn't fix the problem, it was about judging people. It was about holding people responsible. The New Testament does not approach it from that perspective. I think you're just going to have a major problem. And you know where we're going to go? We're going to go right back to 1 Peter where we have been, because this passage is just baffling in every way imaginable. 1 Peter chapter 3, you know what I'm going to read. 1 Peter chapter 3, verse 18, for Christ also hath once suffered for sins, the just for the unjust, that he might bring us to God, being put to death in the flesh, but quickened by the Spirit. All right? By which also he went, this is the resurrected Christ, he went and preached unto the spirits in prison. He went and preached to the spirits in prison. What is going on? Yeah, from a different translation. From a different Bible. I mean, none of this makes any sense. All right, here we go. So he went and preached to the spirits in prison. Now, immediately you're going to be like, well, wait, who are these spirits in prison? Who are these spirits in prison? What's going on? Well, it identifies who the spirits in prison are. Look carefully. And this is where you immediately have to go, wait, something's going on here. So he went and preached to the spirits in prison. And who are they? Those who disobeyed God long ago when God waited patiently while Noah was building his boat. These spirits in prison were spirits that disobeyed while Noah was building the ark. Well, wait, when did this happen? I mean, well, we know when. What is this referring to? The King James states it this way. Just want to make sure you hear it in many translations. Which sometimes were, but he also went and preached unto the spirits in prison, which sometime were disobedient when once the long suffering of God waited in the days of Noah while the ark was a preparing. So the translations, no matter which translation you go with, makes it clear. These spirits in prison did something while the ark was being built. So immediately this adds more complexity and confusion to the entire story. And I think if you're honest with yourself, that's not written in a poetic way. And it's not a general statement about people. First Peter does not say people. He says spirits in prison, not people who died, not the ancient world, not human beings. Peter very deliberately uses non-human language. In the New Testament, when the word spirit is used without qualification, I'm not saying every single time, but most of the time, it refers to a non-human spiritual being. And Peter reinforces that by saying, they are in prison. They're in a place of confinement and judgment. And then, so they're spirits in prison, as I've already demonstrated. They are tied specifically to Noah's time. Disobedient when God's patience waited in the days of Noah while the ark was being prepared. These spirits were active during Noah's lifetime. They were disobedient at that time, and they're now imprisoned. So it seems, at least you have to begin to at least consider that maybe the flood story, according to the New Testament, involves more than just human beings. Was something else going on during the time of the flood? Now, I know, so immediately some of you are going to push back. Oh, you're going to go to this crazy theory. It's ridiculous. And I've heard all of the arguments against it, but let me just make it let me go back to foundational problem number one. If the flood is about judging sinful people, the story makes no sense. You kill everyone simply to just allow the problem to continue. Why did you kill everyone if you're just going to have the same kind of people get on the ark so that they can take the same sin and infect everyone when the door opens? In fact, they don't have to infect everyone. They're infected themselves. They begin to spread the problem. But if the New Testament is giving us a hint that maybe something else was going on. Maybe the world got flooded for some other reason. And this 1 Peter 3 passage is not isolated. Look at 2 Peter. 2 Peter chapter 2. Verse 4, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them into chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. Now, wait a minute. The fallen angels, all of the fallen angels are in prison. All of them are chained up. No, we don't believe all the fallen angels are. We believe many of them are demonic spirits, right? This would seem, so who are these who get chained up? And then immediately, what does it go into? And spared not the old world, but saved Noah, the eighth person, a preacher of righteousness, bringing the flood upon the world of the ungodly. So it goes from these angels right into Noah. Once again, it connects these angels, these spirits, connects it with the story of Noah. That's two places where this occurs. Then in Jude verses 6 and 7, we have angels who did not keep their proper domain are kept in eternal chains. And then Jude immediately mentions Sodom and Gomorrah. So he at least mentions, it's still right there in Genesis, this early part. It doesn't maybe immediately go into Noah, but it's still, you've got angels, you've got something going on. The New Testament, at least in a few places, seems to link a rebellion of spiritual beings who are imprisoned, and sometimes connects it somewhere close to the time of Noah. And I don't think that's an accident. Well, I know it's not an accident if we believe all the Bible is the inspired, inerrant Word of God. So maybe there's an implication here. The flood was not simply about people being bad. Maybe the New Testament is at least making us consider that there was a supernatural rebellion connected to that period of time. So that would mean the flood narrative has a much deeper dimension, a much greater problem than just people are immoral and people are just bad and people are just corrupted, because that problem is not resolved by the flood. Now, you take that and combine it with the first foundational problem. The flood does not fix human sin. The New Testament says the flood era seemed to involve spirits who rebelled. So is it possible that the flood was about something more radical and more specific than any human weakness and human sin? Now I got to be very clear here, right? I'm trying to be very thoughtful and very methodical. But we have to be honest. Christians have debated these details of these passages of Scripture that I've just given you for centuries. And there is literally no universal agreement about exactly who these spirits are or exactly what Christ proclaimed to them. There's no agreement. Nobody knows. Nobody has any idea. But I honestly feel there's no responsible way to read this and say, oh, this is just all about humans. All of these other passages, they were just humans. It's just humans were really, really bad during Genesis 6, and they were just so bad God had to kill all of them. And for some weird reason, they were just as bad when the door of the ark opened because the same bad people were on there. I don't know. I don't think there's any responsible way of going. It doesn't make any sense. So I will say this, even if you want to ignore the moral problem, the New Testament itself, at least I feel, is not going to let you, according to Peter. I don't think he's going to let you. I think he's going to. I think it's not going to let us just say, "Hey, this was just a moral problem." According to Peter, the flood is tied to imprisoned spirits who were active in Noah's day. That means the flood story is not just about sinful people; it's about something much bigger and much stranger. All right. So if the flood, and I think we're kind of now forced into a different question here. If the flood was not meant to cure human sin, which obviously it wasn't, and obviously it didn't, and if it was tied to some kind of spirits who did something wrong and end up in chains, then what exactly was the flood for? And I think to answer that, we got to go back to Genesis chapter 6. And I think things now get a little, do they get, I don't know if they get clear. I don't know what happens, but we have to go back to Genesis chapter 6. All right. And I think we have to look at the corruption before the flood. And I think we have to try to understand it. If the flood was not meant to fix the human heart, which we know it did not do it, did not remove or fix the corruption in any way, shape, or form, And if the New Testament tells us that the flood is connected to imprisoned spirits who were active in Noah's day, then I don't think we have any choice. We've got to go back to Genesis 6, and we have to read it slowly instead of skipping over it. So let's read Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, and I'm going to read it in at least two translations. Are you ready? Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose. And the Lord said, my spirit shall not always strive with man, for that he also is fleshly, yet his days shall be 120 years. Then there were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, that they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown. Right? Genesis chapter 6 in a different translation, verses 1 through 4. Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4. Here we go. Then the people began to multiply on the earth. The daughters were born to them. The sons of God saw the beautiful women and took any they wanted as their wives. Then the Lord said, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time, for they're only mortal flesh. In the future, their normal lifespan will be no more than 120 years. In those days, and for some time after, giant Nephilites lived on the earth. For whenever the sons of God had intercourse with women, they gave birth to children who became the heroes and famous warriors of ancient times. Something is going on there. That whole narrative right there seems confounding and confusing, right? Because you really only have two options. So their big bad sin was godly people married ungodly people. Oh no, the horror. Because that would never have that would require God to flood the entire world because godly people married ungodly people. This is the crime of the century. Bring in the flood, kill everyone, because that's never going to happen again after the that happens throughout the Bible. Now, if you'll notice, the flood story begins right there with Genesis 6, 1 through 4. Now notice, there's no violence, there's no wicked imagination, but something is happening in the world that the narrative wants us to talk about. And I want you to see that. Before you get to everyone is wicked, everyone is vile, it starts with this story about the daughters of men and the sons of God. And they marry and they have children. That's what it starts with. And God is not happy about the situation. This is before we get to sin, wicked imagination. Before we get to any of that, we have this going on in the text. So I believe the text here introduces kind of a boundary violation. The text does not start by saying people are bad. No. It starts by saying the sons of God saw the daughters of men. And it seems that this is identifying two different categories of being. Whatever you think sons of God means, the text is not describing ordinary human marriage. It doesn't appear that it is. The language itself seems to signal there's some kind of a crossing of a boundary going on here. Something is happening here. And then the text describes something, it sounds like new and abnormal. Then we're told the Nephilim were on the earth in those days. And they seem to be the result of these unions between the daughter of men and the sons of God. It seems like something is happening in the world that's not supposed to happen. This doesn't appear to be just bad behavior, doesn't seem to appear just to be moral decline. It doesn't seem to appear to be just ordinary sin, because ordinary sin happened before this, happens after this, but this is where God wipes out everyone on the earth except for 8 people on the ark. Is this possibly pointing to some kind of corruption of the created order itself? Another thing to notice here in these 4 verses, God says, my spirit shall not abide in man, or with man, in man, depending on the translation. The King James says, my spirit shall not always strive with man. Another translation says, my spirit will not put up with humans for such a long time. Not put up with humans, not strive with man. He says his days shall be 120 years. And he doesn't say, hey, you've been naughty, you haven't been good. But he seems to be saying that he's grown tired of humanity, of man. Like somehow something is being threatened here with human beings. Now, a few verses later, the text switches. Now, in fact, you look at it, verse 5, after we get through this kind of interesting narrative of verses 1 through 4, all of a sudden it says, and God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart were only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. Now it switches to, it goes from this interesting narrative about the daughters of men and the sons of God, and then it switches to everyone. It switches to the whole world. And it says, now, when the earth was corrupt in God's sight, and the earth was filled with violence, and God saw that the earth was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted their ways on the earth. Now, it's interesting. He doesn't just say people. He doesn't just say human hearts. He says all flesh. It sounds like creation itself is being corrupted. But it goes from this interesting introduction to now everything seems to be corrupted. Everything has been touched in some kind of negative way. So if we're honest, the flood story doesn't start with, hey, people are sinners. It begins with something is going on. There's some kind of distortion. There's some kind of corrupting. Human wickedness is a part of the picture, and we cannot deny that. But it doesn't seem to be the whole picture. It seems to be something else is going on. Now, if the problem is merely that humans are sinful, then the flood is pointless. But if the problem is that humanity and creation itself are being corrupted at a deeper level, then the flood becomes a story of containment, of preservation, not moral reformation. So Noah is not the morally perfect restart for humanity because he's a sinner and he sins. Noah is a preservation of the human line. All right? He's not, here's the morally perfect guy. Here's 8 morally perfect people who's going to rid the world of corruption. No, they are morally corrupt. But somehow Noah and his family is going to preserve the human line. Now, Christians have argued forever about the identity of the sons of God. I don't want you to think that they haven't. There is very little agreement on this. But whatever view you're going to take, the text clearly is describing something abnormal and catastrophic happening in a world before the flood. It has to be. That's the only way to make the flood make any sense. The flood story does not begin with bad people. It begins with a world that is becoming maybe something it was never meant to be. Now, before we can maybe move forward, we got to deal with the sons of God carefully, and we have to deal with them responsibly. All right? So we got to try to figure out who the sons of God were, and we got to try to understand this linguistically, right? What does the phrase mean in Hebrew? Textually, how does the Bible use it? Historically, how did ancient readers understand it? And we got to evaluate maybe the other possible view that, the daughters of men, they're ungodly, and the sons of God, they're just godly people. Does that even work? So let's go from a linguistic standpoint. What does sons of God mean? Now, if we look it up in the Hebrew, I don't know how far we're going to get here, but if you go to the Old Testament, look at Genesis chapter 6, and it came to pass when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and the daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God, go to the interlinear, the sons, that's one Hebrew word. It's this Hebrew word. It's, I think it's like, I'm not going to try to say it. It's this.
Strong's H1121. Bane.
All right. If you see a transliteration, it's B-E-N, but it's Bane. All right. So you have that the sons of God, Bane, and then that's the sons, Bane, and then of God, which is Elohim, if I remember correctly.
Strong's H430, entry 1. Eloach. Second entry, Elohim.
There we go.
Elohim.
Ben Elohim, or Bain Elohim.
Eloach.
So you got some of these others, but basically Bain Elohim is how we would typically see it and understand the phrase. Is the phrase in Genesis 6:2 is Bain Elohim. Bain, sons, Elohim of God, or of the gods. Sons of God, or the sons of the gods, of the sons of the divine beings. Maybe you could even go that far. So sons means beings who belong to a class or order. Bain, sons. And so you have sons of the prophets, members of the prophetic guild, sons of the exile, people belonging to the exile group, and sons of gods, or son of the gods, beings belonging to the divine realm. So this idea of sons means you belong to a class or an order. Bain Elohim. It does not naturally mean morally good people. And I don't think there's any lexical evidence to say that the sons of God means godly men, even though you can try to make that argument. And I've tried to make that argument in the past. I've tried because wait a minute, there's some kind of weird thing going on between the daughters of men and some kind of sons of Bane of Elohim. There's some kind of what's happening here? That just seems so conspiratorial and crazy. But from a lexical standpoint, as I've already pointed out, we've already got enough in the New Testament to make us go, wait, what is going on here? And the flood itself makes no sense unless we're looking for some other kind of explanation. Now, how does the Old Testament use Bain Elohim? How does it use this phrase? Every other time Bain Elohim appears in the Hebrew Bible, it seems to refer to heavenly beings and not humans. Job chapter 1, verse 6. The sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan also came among them. Doesn't appear to be human beings. That appears to be angelic beings. Job chapter 2, verse 1, you've got the same scene. Job 38:7, when the morning stars sang together and all the sons of God shouted for joy. This is creation language long before Israel existed. And these again appear to be heavenly beings. So there is a Hebrew phrase for human beings as God's children. Israel is sometimes called sons, children of the Lord, but that is not the phrase Bain Elohim. Genesis 6 seems to use a different, very specific phrase that everywhere else, well, at least I'm going to say the majority of other places, I would have to sit here and work through every single verse, but I think I can be somewhat pretty dogmatic. Everywhere else it's used, it's referring to angelic beings. Every other place it's used. Bain Elohim, These are the sons of the, it's some kind of something spiritual being is going on. Now, how did the ancient Jews understand this? Now, I don't think this was controversial in Second Temple Judaism, all right? We have ancient Jewish texts like the First Enoch, Jubilees, Dead Sea Scrolls, and all seem to interpret Genesis 6 as angelic beings rebelling and corrupting humanity. The human rulers of godly men, basically, is the way was it human rulers or godly men? This idea that these were human beings or these were godly men, that does not appear until much later, and it's largely an attempt to avoid the supernatural implications of the text. So if you go to Second Temple Judaism, First Enoch, Jubilee, Dead Sea Scrolls, that kind of period, they're going to be like, no, these angelic beings. This idea of, no, they're human rulers, they're godly men, they're not angelic beings, seems to come much later because there's a level of uncomfortableness with the text. Wait, what? Fallen angels having relations with the daughters of men? This sounds like something out of science fiction. This sounds crazy. And I understand that, but let's remember, okay? We're in Genesis 6. In Genesis 3, we have a talking snake. All right? So, I mean, come on now, all right? We got to put it in that kind of context. Now, there is that view, just so that you know, that says the sons of God equals Seth's godly line, and the daughters of men equals Cain's ungodly line. But there's a problem. Problem number one, the text never really seems to say that. Genesis 6 does not mention Seth. It does not mention Cain. It does not mention any covenantal lines of any kind. It says sons of God, daughters of men, two different categories. And not only that, the language doesn't match. If Moses wanted to say godly men married ungodly women, he could have just said that, but he doesn't. He uses this kind of, some kind of language that doesn't make any sense. And not only that, this kind of intermarriage happens constantly with no flood. Godly men marry ungodly women throughout the Bible. Abraham and Hagar, Samson and the Philistines, Solomon. How many foreign wives? Israel and the nations. It's like, whoa. You're not supposed to marry them. Kill everyone. I know. Again, the flood doesn't fix that problem. And then we've got the Nephilim. The Nephilim seems to be the result of these unions. If this is just human intermarriage, then why does the text single them out as something, there's some kind of extraordinary? There's something different about these individuals. Now, I think the original audience would not have just read this as just humans. At least I don't think so. Ancient Israelites already believed in a divine council and heavenly beings. They already had categories for angels, messenger spirits. So if they would have heard sons of God, I think they would have immediately thought heavenly beings. I don't think they would have been like, oh no, those are the nice church boys. Those were the nice church guys. Those are the godly Jews. I don't think they would have understood that. So I think linguistically, I think textually, I think historically, the sons of God in Genesis 6 refers to heavenly beings, not human men. Now, that doesn't mean we understand everything about how this works. Okay, don't even think for a second we do. Or that the text answers all of our questions, because the text does not answer all of our questions. But also remember, I just want to make sure I point this out. We already covered Genesis chapter 4. And it says, and to Seth, to him also there was born a son, and he called his name Enos. Then began men to call upon the name of the Lord. Remember that men begin to call upon the name of the Lord. There are a lot of issues with that textually, and we talked about it, that it can easily be translated. They began to profane the name of the Lord. So you don't end up with a godly line. You end up where they begin to profane and blaspheme and use God's name in a wrong way. So we talked about that in earlier episodes, and you can go listen to that that discussion, which would be another thing that would destroy that Genesis 6 is the godly line versus the ungodly line. Again, even if that was the problem, why kill everyone by a flood, since you're just going to have the same problem show up 15 seconds after the door of the boat opens, basically. I think the original audience would not have heard, these were mixed marriages. It was they were unequally yoked. Oh, the horror! Yes, you should have flooded everyone. I don't think anyone would have read it at that time. And if Genesis 6 is just about godly men marrying ungodly women, then it's completely unremarkable. It's still logically routine. It's not even anywhere close worthy of a global catastrophe you're kind of like, wait, what just happened? God just loses his mind because of that? The sons of God equals godly men is not driven, I think, by the Hebrew text. It's driven by discomfort with what the text actually says. And I can understand that the whole story makes no sense. And then you throw this in there, it gets really weird. Wait, God killed everyone. And wait, what was going on? Wait, what? Are we sure? I don't know. I don't know what was happening. Now, the imprisoned spirits in Jude and 2 Peter, I think begin to kind of maybe add more to this. And I know we're almost at 60 minutes. Let's see if we can get through this. I think we've established a couple of things so far. The flood did not fix the human heart. That's a fact. Nobody, I don't care what view you take, you have to admit the flood did not fix anything. All right? So if we're just going to say that the flood was there to fix sin, it did not fix sin. All right? Unless you're going to say there was some other problem going on, at least that much it did not fix. Everyone has to agree with that. I think no one can deny that the New Testament, when it talks about things related to the flood, it uses this weird language about angels or spirits being in some kind of prison. That is baffling because it doesn't offer any real explanation. And then we have to also acknowledge Genesis 6 does not begin the flood story with, hey, everyone was naughty boys and girls. And so God said, hey, I'm done with all of you. I'm going to kill all of you. It starts off with, wait, the daughters of men and the sons of God, and they took wives. Whoa, wait, what's going on? What is happening? But inevitably it turns into, I'm going to kill everyone. Now, so then we have to go to the rest of those New Testament passages to see what we find. And again, let me go back to 1 Peter. Christ went and proclaimed to the spirits in prison because they formerly did not obey when God's patience waited in the days of Noah. I mean, you got to really look at 1 Peter 3. They're spirits, they're in prison, they're disobedient, and the disobedience is directly tied to the days of Noah. So the New Testament seems to be saying there was a spiritual rebellion that connected to the flood. 2 Peter 2, 4-5, for if God did not spare angels when they sinned, but cast them into pits of darkness to be kept until judgment, and did not spare the ancient world, but preserved Noah. Notice again what Peter does. He mentions angels who sinned, he mentions they're imprisoned, and he immediately mentions Noah. Peter seems to be connecting the sin of angels and the flood and divine judgment all together. And then we have Jude 6-7, and the angels who did not stay with their own domain, but left their proper dwelling, he has kept in eternal chains under gloomy darkness until the judgment of the great day. And let me say this again, I cannot stress this enough. There's no way to get around. Why do we have angels in chains if they're locked up? If this is just all angels, if this is just fallen angels and they all get locked up, then there are no demons going around. Where do the demons come from? We typically believe the demons are fallen angels. Well, the fallen angels in these passages, they all end up locked up. Who are these angels locked up? Why are they locked up? Why didn't God just lock up all of them, including Satan? Why did these specific angels find themselves in chains? Then Jude immediately says, just as Sodom and Gomorrah. Now, just think. So what is he saying? Were these angels and the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah something similar? There were angels They left their proper domain, and they're now imprisoned. And then their sin is being used as a warning and example. Now, are we saying that the men of Sodom and Gomorrah was going to leave their proper domain and do something that was, they were going to try to have relations with angelic beings? There's no question that the men in Sodom was going to engage in rape they were going to commit rape against angelic beings. That's what they were attempting to do. So we have spirits in prison, disobedient in Noah's day. We have angels who sinned who are in prison and then Noah. And we have angels who abandoned their proper domain who are imprisoned. The New Testament is telling you there was an angelic rebellion somewhere connected to that part of Genesis, and all these angels are in prison. Now, I want to make it very clear. That's not fringe. That's not speculation. That's not buy my book, get my DVD. It's not about the great Nephilim conspiracy theory. It's just about, hey, what the Bible itself is establishing. Now, that all of a sudden Genesis makes a little bit more sense. Sons of God left their proper place and they took human women. Jude says the angels left their proper dwelling. Peter says they were disobedient in Noah's time and are now imprisoned. This is the same story from three angles. Now the flood at this point then is no longer people were bad, so God hit reset. It becomes creation itself was being corrupted by a supernatural rebellion. The flood is judgment, but it is containment. It is preservation. It is cosmic cleanup. Now, again, the Bible does not tell us exactly how this works. And so when we start going into wild speculation, that's when it starts sounding like a crazy conspiracy theory. And it's not going to satisfy your curiosity. It just kind of tells us, hey, something happened here. We cannot speculate, but we may not be able to speculate, but we have to refuse any attempt to ignore the text. The text is like, something happened here, and it makes sense. Hey, if human flesh is corrupted because of this intermarriage that occurred and the type of children they are producing now are not truly human and not truly angelic, there's some kind of mixed between angelic and human, can they be redeemed? Well, all you can do is wipe everyone out, preserve 8 people that are not corrupted, that have not been corrupted by this angelic human coming together. And then when they get out of the ark, they'll go back to producing children. Now, the sin problem is still going to be there, but now that sin problem can be resolved by Jesus Christ taking on human flesh and dying in the flesh to redeem fallen man. The New Testament does not treat the flood as a children's story about naughty people. It treats it as an aftermath of a supernatural rebellion that seemed to threaten the created order itself. If the flood was about preserving the human line and containing a cosmic corruption, then Noah is not the hero of a morality tale. He's the carrier of the seed, and the story of the Bible starts to look very different from here on. The flood was not meant to fix the human heart, which it did not. Scripture itself proves that. The flood was not just about punishing bad people. The New Testament itself does not even let us say that. So we're forced to ask a different question. If the flood was not about curing sin, and if it was connected to a supernatural rebellion and a corruption of the created order, then what was it for? And I think we can see. It had to get rid of that corruption. The flood is about preservation, not perfection. Sin continues, violence continues, corruption continues, but humanity continues, and that's the whole point. The flood did not happen because people were sinners. People have always been sinners. The flood happened because something was happening to humanity that could not be allowed to continue. The Bible itself treats the flood as something far more serious, far more cosmic, and far more terrifying than we were ever told in Sunday school. The flood was not about moral reform. It was about preserving humanity from annihilation and corruption, not moral corruption. They're already morally corrupted, but corrupting humanity itself, that they're no longer human. And if they're no longer human, they can no longer be redeemed. That's the only thing that makes any sense, because it accomplished that. If we make, that's what the flood is about. It accomplished that. 8 people were preserved. 8 people carried on humanity, and humanity picked up right where they left off, sinning. And they sinned and they sinned and they sinned. Genesis 9, 10, 11, 12, all the way to 50, Exodus chapter 1, all through Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy, Joshua, Judges, Ruth. You get the rest of the Bible until Jesus shows up to ultimately die and pay for sin, to redeem people. But he could redeem people because humanity had been preserved. That's the only thing that makes any sense. Now, there's still a million of philosophical questions. It's like, well, wait, these angels sin and you could lock them up. You could have locked up Satan from minute 1 and sin would have never entered into the earth. Okay, right? I mean, there's so many problems with the story. And if you could wipe all of those people out, why didn't you just wipe out Adam and Eve and just stop the whole story before you get thousands upon thousands of years of human history of murder, rape, genocide, the Holocaust, every other horrible thing that's taken place? The Bible doesn't always give us all the answers, but there's enough going on in Genesis 6, 1 through 4, 1 Peter, 2 Peter, Jude, that you have to stop and go, there's a bunch of angels locked up in chains. Why are they in chains? Why isn't every fallen angel in chains? Satan roams about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. He's not in chains. Well, we have demonic activity. Okay, well, the demons aren't in chains. Well, then why are these angels in chains? What did they do? And it sounds like they did something at the time of Noah. And it had something to do with leaving their first domain, breaking categories. And it sounds like that they were taking upon themselves the daughters of men. And some say, well, angels can't engage in that kind of activity. Well, then why did the angels in Sodom and Gomorrah, why did the people have to be blinded? If it's impossible to have physical relations with them, then there was nothing that could have been done to them, right? There would have been impossible to have any relations with them. But something had to be done to try to stop it. Correct? I don't know. I'm not saying that proves anything. I'm just throwing out every kind of idea. Now, this is not something I will typically debate with anyone. Where I will debate with anyone is the flood story. If you tell me the flood story makes perfect sense, I'm going to say, no, it doesn't. Okay. There's a million reasons why it doesn't make sense, but it ultimately makes no sense that God kills everyone to supposedly fix a problem that he doesn't fix. That makes no sense. But if he is fixing a problem that was actually fixed, then it makes at least it makes some sense. Now, still, it doesn't make any sense because God could have stopped the whole thing from ever happening in the first place. That's a bigger problem, but yeah. All right, that's 69 minutes. I know that wasn't great. I know that wasn't wonderful. Don't feel like I was on the top of my game there, but man, that's a lot of stuff to work through. I did the best I could, and that's the best I can do. So thank you so very much for listening. I hope that provides some help. And I tried to approach it in a different way by showing you the foundational problems with the story and then building everything from there, okay? But hopefully we did okay. Hopefully. All right. And, we have people listening to us. Where are people listening to us from this evening? Maine. Thank you so very much. Of course, North Carolina. There's Oklahoma. Thank you for showing up. Texas. Oh, we have Ontario, Canada, the Canadians came out. See, it starts getting a little later in the evening, and that's when the Canadians start listening to me. All right, so thank you so very much. And yeah, I appreciate everyone. And I know that was a lot of content. I will get this uploaded in the next 5 to 10 minutes. So if you need to go back and look through it, you can go back and listen, and hopefully it will all make some sense. All right. Thank you so very much. Everyone have a wonderful, wonderful evening. I don't know what the weather is going to be in your area. We'll see if the great winter apocalypse hits Texas here in the next, 24 hours. But if it does, at least we got to talk about the great flood apocalypse of the book of Genesis. And maybe we now understand it maybe a little bit better, but we definitely don't have all the questions answered because there's no way. But I think we at least raised some very important questions. Thanks for listening. God bless.